In this presentation, we will be looking at how to set up an enterprise architect repository in Amazon Web Services Cloud. We will be using the new capability of EA11 to connect to a repository in cloud and two key offerings from Amazon Web Services, namely the relational database services and the virtual servers, to set this up. EA11 came up with a lot of exciting new features, including advanced documentation, new profile supports, enhanced UI, etc. It also came up with a range of new deployment options, including cloud, RAS, and OSLC. The cloud services allows users to seamlessly access model information from anywhere in the world. The cloud services greatly simplifies administration overheads and enhances performance for remote access. More information on how to host a cloud service could be found in this Cloud Services page of Sparx Systems website. This page allows us to familiarize with the concepts involved and how and when to use cloud services, the configurations required, and much more. It also talks about other deployment options such as OSLC and RAS. To leverage the capability of EA11, we will be using Amazon Web Services Hosting Solutions. Amazon Web Services offers a range of products and services. Amazon's EC2, which is a virtual server, allows us to host a Windows or a Linux machine with a range of configurations. This allows us to quickly set up a virtual server that could be dedicated to host Sparx Systems Cloud Service. We'll be also using the relational database service of Amazon, which helps us set up, operate, and scale up a MySQL, Oracle, SQL Server, or a Postgres database in cloud. The process here shows the steps involved in setting up a EA repository on AWS Cloud. We'll be creating a DB instance in AWS and then setting up a database on it. We'll then create a virtual server on which we will set up the System DSNs and the EA cloud services. We'll then use EA to connect to it and then set up the security and version control. Drilling down into creating the DB instance in AWS, we'll see that as we log into AWS, it shows a range of products and services that is offered. You have to navigate to the RDS and then choose to launch a new DB instance. We can choose from one of the offered DB engines and then select the intended product configurations, specify the DB details, and then review and create the database. As we drill down into choosing RDS in AWS dashboard, it's under the database section, and as we click on it, it'll open up the RDS dashboard, which not only highlights any active instances and its health, but will also allow us to create a new DB instance. As we click next to proceed, Amazon offers us to choose from one of the offered database engines, namely the MySQL, the Postgres, the Oracle, and SQL Server. For this demonstration purposes, I'm choosing MySQL, and then as we click next, Amazon will prompt us to ask on how this database instance is going to be used. It could be used for the actual production, in which case there will be respective SLAs, or it could be just intended for use for a trial basis. As we choose the intended setup and then move on, Amazon will prompt us for the DB details, namely the instance identifier, a master username, and the password that we'll be using to connect to this RDS instance. So the last step is then to review the configurations that we used, and then also even look at the backups and maintenance activities that we have chosen, and then launch the instance. Once we are done with that, we will now setting up the database on the RDS instance. The steps involved in setting up a database shows the first thing that we need is a DB workbench. Once you have got the DB workbench in place, then we can set up a connection to the RDS and then download the DB scripts from EA website, create a DB repository, and then run the DB scripts to create the tables. As we drill down to look at how to set up a connection to the RDS instance, you have to use the host name of RDS instance, which could be found in the RDS dashboard, specify the connection method and the port, and say test connection. If the connection parameters are right, we'll be able to create the new MySQL connection using the MySQL workbench. As we move on to the next step, we can create new repositories using this MySQL workbench, creating an EA repository in this case where I'm executing the scripts downloaded from Sparx Systems website to create the intended tables that we used to host an EA repository. We can consider to replace the drop table if exists with create if not exist to be on the safer side. As we move to the higher level, we see that the next step is to create a virtual server that we are going to use to set up the System DSNs and set up Sparx Systems Cloud Services. If I drill down into the steps involved in creating a virtual server, we can see that we have to choose the EC2 instance where we install the required software. This includes launching a new instance after choosing an appropriate Amazon machine image configuration and image type, and then reviewing and launching it. To navigate to EC2, you gotta log into Amazon Web Services and then choose the EC2 instance, which is the virtual servers in the cloud. As I click next, it allows us to choose an appropriate Amazon machine image, which is a range of Windows and Linux machines to choose from. You have to pay specific attention on what configuration is required, and then as we say select, it will ask us to choose the instance type. There are a range of compute optimized and memory optimized nodes that's available to choose from. It could be depending on what's required for a specific organization. And as we move on, it will allow us to review and then launch a EC2 virtual server that's ready to be set up to install a System DSN or any other software that's required. As we move to the higher level process, the next step is to create the System DSN, which is required to connect to the RDS instance. We need to have the right ODBC connector and then create a System DSN to connect to the RDS instance and choose the repository to be connected. You gotta have the right ODBC 32-bit connectivity to add a new connection. As we click add, choose the same path that we chose to create the MySQL workbench connection for server, and also use the same username and password that we set up while creating the RDS instance. The next step is to set up a EA Cloud Service software in the EC2 virtual server. The steps involved in that shows that we gotta install the Sparx Systems Cloud Service, then use the database manager to configure database connections. If you drill down into how to install Sparx Systems Cloud Service, upon installation it will allow you to configure the ports that's used by default. In this case, I'm choosing 80 as the server port as it's going to be a HTTP connectivity, but it could be varying based on individual setup. To check if everything is set up well, you gotta see if the dedicated IP address is referring to the Sparx Systems Cloud Server and is ready to accept new connections. The next step is to use the database manager to create new database connections. As we click add, the database manager allows us to choose the system DSN that we previously created. Once we choose that, we can test connection, and that will be added to the list of database managers available in the Sparx Systems client. We got to also configure the database manager to make sure it's referring to the right database, and then it's also ready to accept queries. You can also make it a read-only connection if required. So now that we have created a DB instance in AWS, set up the database, created a virtual server, set up system DSNs, and then also set up the EA cloud service, we are now ready to use EA11 to connect to the virtual cloud hosted repository. Before doing that, EA user, you might know already that you got to do a project transfer to make a base project available, and then we obviously need to have EA11 installed at this point to proceed any further, then connect to the cloud using the database manager in EC2. If we drill down to the steps in project transfer, this is a normal file to DBMS project transfer. So you just copy across your base project to the actual database that we have created or we have set up in the RDS. Now it's time to have EA11 installed. If you haven't done it already, you can try or get it downloaded from the registered section of the EA11 web. The next step is to actually connect to the cloud repository using EA11 connect to cloud option. You can use the URL directly, and the model name is the name of the DSN that we created, or you can mask the URL to a more logical name. For example, in this case we have done cloud.sparxsystems.in. So what we have seen now is how to set up a DB instance and then create a virtual server and then connect to it using EA. Now we'll be seeing the steps involved in setting up the security and how to manage users, configure version control, and then control packages. So like any normal EA project, we gotta enable security from the project security, enable security option, and then giving the appropriate authorization key. And then once that's done, we are as if in any other EA model. We can create users, assign memberships, and then also import from Active Directory. Then to configure version control, we gotta have a version control server that could be hosted in the same EC2 server as well. And then we gotta create a local working copy and then configure version control in EA to create an ID. As in this case, we have created EA_SSIN. Then the last step is then to start controlling packages by using the newly created ID. So once we have control packages, all the options of version control like checking in, checking out, getting all the latest, putting latest, so on and so forth will be enabled to let you do a normal version control setup. Thus, we have successfully created a DB instance in AWS and then saw how to set up a virtual server, set up DSNs, and then install the EA cloud services to successfully connect to the virtual cloud using EA11. To summarize the steps, firstly, we created a DB instance in RDS. We selected the MySQL engine, and then we set up a database using MySQL Workbench. Then we created a EC2 virtual server in which we set up the system DSN that was used to connect to the database instance. And then we installed EA Cloud Services software and created database managers. Then connected to it using Enterprise Architect 11, and finally set up the security and version control on the virtual repository. Thanks for listening.